What's going on, everyone? Just doing a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, we're gonna get going in just a second. Let me get everything set up here. Okay, that's what I wanted. It's a little bigger here. All right, so we're gonna get started here. Well, it's the first stream back. It's been a little bit since we've had one. Please let me know if you can hear me okay in the chat. As you can see, I'm using a new microphone, one that I don't have to have directly on my face all the time. So that's good. I don't have to worry about that anymore. The other microphone, it never seemed sensitive enough, so I always had to, have it really close, and that was always annoying. It used to distract my view and all that. So hopefully this is better. Let me know if it's not. So we have a few meta topics, some announcements and things like that to go over just real quick. We're gonna get that done, maybe 5 minutes or so, and then we'll jump into the usual Q&A, for the stream, and then we'll jump into the main content. We'll talk about Web Service Day. So, of course, it's been a kind of a while since we've done a live stream. Everybody knows, I was a victim of a burglary, and state of Florida is currently taking him to task at the moment. So I'm not worrying about that anymore. That's completely behind me. Time for us to move forward and, get back to the technology, because that's kind of what matters. So, but I appreciate all the support everybody's given me. It took me a little bit to get back and doing videos and streams and this and that, but everything's fine now. It's all good. No big deal. I am back to normal. So all good. Next thing is we're approaching the 250,000 subscriber milestone, which is amazing. Anybody that's watched my my 5K video or 10K, 25K, knows that I never set out to do this. I never set out to get to this exact point. So to have, built a community of close to 250,000 people is kind of cool. And Discord's growing as well. Discord is I think 6K, and that grows by 5 to 10 people daily. So that's working out well. That's kind of a success story, and people are constantly saying how great the server is and how it's well curated, and how maybe they're on other servers, but those are just not as good as this one. So that's all really good, I think. Community-wise and how everything's functioning is quite good. There is going to be a 250,000 video special. There actually is. I'm working with my most senior team member, Calix, to kind of bring that to life. He does video editing and things like that. We already have the script ready to go. I'm just recording the content. We're going to put that together, and I think you will really like it. So be on the lookout for that over the next probably month, I would say. We're still, I think, 26 or so days from 250,000. So just about. Next thing is kind of around this time is the 1-year anniversary for a lot of things. It's the 1-year anniversary of the point where I put out the Craigslist video, which in a way is kind of responsible for, kicking off this entire community and channel as a whole. Because when I put out that video, I only had 8,000 subscribers, and then after a few months, I suddenly had 60,000. So that was responsible for a lot of the initial growth and propulsion of the community at large. So I just want to take a second just to thank of course the team, because I built the team right after I put out that video, and most of the team that's here now has been with me since the very beginning, with the exception of a few people. So I thank everybody for their loyalty on that. And of course, I've thanked them individually, but this is kind of the public thanks for that. Of course, EMKC is about 1 year old now, so we put that together. It didn't end up being the Q&A thing that I wanted it to be, but it did end up being a really cool place to learn new languages and do challenges and things like that. And that's kind of where its main purpose is kind of at now. We will eventually get contests going and we will do more, but EMKC now is kind of geared towards this language and programming skills, and then we're going to do that through challenges and contests. So we will keep up with that. Of course, we do have a new live stream We do have a new live stream schedule, and I hope everybody likes it being scheduled up front. Part of the reason why I wanted to do that is I always had this issue where I wasn't exactly sure sometimes on what I wanted to do it on, and then sometimes I changed it the last second, and what that caused me to do is kind of rush through the content. And then by the time stream time came, I sometimes felt like under-equipped for it. So I'm hoping by setting a schedule, which I've already done, the schedule is posted in Discord and also on my latest community message on YouTube, if you're curious what it is. But that schedule will go for, we're going to call this season 2. It's going to span for 4 months, and it's going to contain a total of 9 streams every 2 weeks at noon, starting today. So you can pick the ones you want to be at. Hopefully you want to be at them all, but you'll know ahead of time what they're going to be. And if there's one that's of particular interest to you, you'll be able to schedule ahead of time and make sure you're there. So I feel like that was an upgrade, and I'm glad we're doing it that way now. A couple new things. I have some new artwork for my logo and also my channel, so I want to say thanks to the artist who did that. His name is Spare Pencil, or that's his alias on Discord. I put a link to his Twitter in the description if you want to check him out. He's a very talented artist. And then I have some new equipment. I got a new microphone right here. I finally tossed out that old gold newer kit that I got on Amazon for like 30 bucks, and I upgraded to something better that I don't have to have attached directly to my mouth. So I think that'll be an upgrade. Plus, I think the audio is clear as well. The other benefit to this is I get to do noise reduction before it gets to the computer. So what you should already notice is that there's no background noises, there's no humming, there's none of that nonsense that people used to not like during the streams. So that's going to be an upgrade. It should be a more clear, less taxing on the ears in terms of random noises coming through it. Let me know if you hear anything weird. You shouldn't. It should just be completely quiet. It should just be my voice. All right, and that's everything we covered. I had about 8 minutes here, so that's all the announcement stuff. So it's time to jump into the Q&A piece. I know I forgot to mention, if you have any questions regarding web servers, certainly put those in the chat. I did right over there. If you wanted to put them in there, you can do it. And I'll try to answer them all live. We're going to cover several. Well, let me get the segments out of the way here. There we are. Oh, I gotta make myself smaller. I'm way too big. I'm far too large. There we are. Okay. So we got the meta out of the way. Moving on to HTTP servers. Let's check out some questions. Ivan Sakal said, what are some of the best web servers for Python-based web apps? So we're not... That's actually a good question, because I want to make a point on that. As we're talking about web servers, there's kind of two different things that can be applied, when we're speaking about web servers. We could be talking about the broad HTTP servers that actually service HTTP requests, things like static content, and also some dynamic content, and then some of them will forward requests through them to an app server. So like when we think of web servers for Python, we could either be thinking of like an Nginx or an Apache, which proxies requests through Apache to a Python app server, or we could actually just be speaking about the app server directly. Something like, of course I haven't used it in a while, I think, wow, I can't remember any Python web server, Python app server. Like, why can't I think of it right now? I don't know. Anyways, there are, we can think of like the Flask, app server for Python as kind of a app server, but it's not really a web server. It's not really designed for that. It's designed to take incoming requests for Python and convert them into some output, which is then usually sent through a normal web server. So in the context of this video, what we're talking about is those HTTP servers. We're not speaking about any specific language per se, because the assumption is that all languages, with the exception of PHP, which we'll talk about later, kind of have their own web server or app server that they use separately, which is then proxied through a normal HTTP server. So we'll get to that as we talk more about these. Okay, we got some questions. I'm going to start with the web server questions first. Okay, no problem. So there's no web server questions. If you have web server questions, let me know. I'm going to answer some non-web server questions as well. Ayush asked, is it legal to scrape data from the internet? And the answer is usually, but not always. So when you're scraping data from the internet, kind of the thing you need to look at is, are you using kind of credentials to access this data? So if you're scraping data from the internet that you first logged in to get, then what you might be doing is you might be violating a company's terms of service, and that could lead to some kind of legal gray area. But if you're just scraping data that's publicly available, then there's usually not a problem with that. I mean, some may disagree. Some say that data scraping is completely illegal, but in my opinion, that's never really been the case. If the people that have the data wanted to protect that data, they'd put it behind an authentication thing. But as long as it's just a page that's on the internet publicly available, then you should be okay. How did I increase security after the break-in? Well, I am creating a kind of a sophisticated security system right now. There'll be a video that comes out on that once I finish that project. I had a little setback. My house is prone to lightning, so as I was developing kind of my new stuff, I had a lightning strike nearby, which came in and fried some of my stuff. So I had a slight setback. I'm going to be working on that later, but I'm increasing security largely with technology and not too much else. Have you ever done a bug bounty ever? Actually, no, but I find that very interesting, and it's definitely something I'd like to do in the future if I could. Does encryption, e.g. the HTTPS protocol, always use symmetric encryption? The answer to that question is, that's a good question. I don't know, actually. I know with SSH what happens is it's asymmetric encryption to transfer the symmetric key, and then the rest of the stuff is symmetric. So I suspect HTTPS is similar. The problem with going direct symmetric encryption is that implies that the key is on both sides already, whereas asymmetric encryption does not require the key to be on both sides, just requires there to be a public key, private key pair. And maybe that's how HTTPS does it as well. Otherwise, you'd have to transfer the password in the clear, the key in the clear, and that'd be kind of weird, of course, because somebody could just snoop on that key. So I would say it does involve symmetric encryption, but it may not start out symmetrically. How to get good at competitive programming? Do you do it? I don't do any competitive programming. I have in the past participated in, like when I lived, I don't live near any like large metropolitan areas anymore, but when I did, I used to take part in hackathons and things like that, and those are always enjoyable. But how to get better at it, I would say just go there and do one. You have to get exposed to it so you can understand kind of what it is and what you need to be doing. And if you expose yourself to that kind of stuff, then you'll be able to get better at it. You'll know kind of what it takes. But to say specifically what you could do to get better, it's kind of just based on what it is and what they're building as well. Aaron Bell asked, this is a good question, thank you. When someone hits your IP, how does it actually direct the request to the code you wrote? And we're going to talk about that in depth actually in this video, but usually what it does is a request comes in to your IP, and then there's a thing called server name indication. And if that request was requested through a domain like example.org, then what the web server and Apache, Nginx, Light, all these are able to do this. They're able to say, okay, well, I see a host of example.org. I can have a little directive here that says if a request comes in for example.org, then forward that request on to some app server. So you can imagine you'd have like Apache or Nginx kind of ran the edge of the server, and then you can think of your app server as sitting behind Apache or Nginx, and then a request comes in, it gets forwarded through to your code. Once your code is done processing it and it's created a response, it's able to pass that back through the web server and back to the user. And that's essentially how that works. And then as far as what is interpreting the code, we'll see in this video that in the case of like a PHP, there's actually a module for Apache that can understand and interpret PHP code. But generally speaking, you use an app server such as like WebBrick for Ruby or Node.js or PHP FPM for PHP or something for Python, whether it's just the built-in Flask one or whatever, and then that's able to actually service the code in the same way like mod PHP does. Do I have an experience with BSD? I don't. I really should look at that. I know I've installed FreeBSD on a VM for a little bit, but I don't do a whole lot with it. I'm not actually sure what its primary benefit is, but I'm certainly interested in learning about it at some point. I should give it another look. Adrian Velez asked, I think that's Biden, right? I've heard that Apache uses a thread per connection. Is this still the case? And do the other web servers do the same? We're actually going to be talking about that specifically in the modes. I have each of the 3 modes for Apache, and I have Nginx's and Lighttpd. Its mode of operation, which is similar to Nginx. We'll be talking about that in a second. But in short, it used to Apache used to do one process. That's the pre-fork model, but as new web servers come out like Nginx, Apache is kind of forced to compete with that, and then they've upgraded how they do it, to using the worker and event model, which is kind of more in line with how Nginx does it, and we'll go into that in depth here in a little bit. Okay, 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're going to jump into the main content here. AKA Nate asked, why do you like web dev so much? That's an easy one. I like web dev so much because it's not just web development that I like, it's development using web technologies. So I enjoy, a long time ago, back in 2003 or so, 2004, I told a friend of mine, developer friend of mine, I said, you know what, the web is the future. The web is the future. All these kind of cross-platform stuff that people are trying to do, either through the JVM or portable C and C++ code, like that's not going to last. That's going to work out fine for certain things, but the future is not more Windows WinForm apps. The future is not more desktop Java apps. The future is the browser as the de facto platform for all applications. And while that didn't end up being 100% true, what ended up being true is that you can build virtually anything with web technologies now. And that's not to say that you build them on the web, but it is to say that you use the standard JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and then various other things that compile to JavaScript to build now dynamic applications. Anybody who's using the Discord app, maybe you don't know this, but that's built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with Electron. It looks like a desktop app. It does a lot of things that a desktop app will do, but it's not written in your traditional language like, say, Java or C#, for Windows and then others. It's actually made using web technologies. And because the browser, the Chromium open source browser, the same thing that things like Brave and Chrome are built on, the reason that people use that, of course, is because that browser is very well supported across many platforms. Yeah, it's a bit of a memory hog. They could certainly improve on that, but you can guarantee that whether you're on a Mac or Windows or Linux or some other system, you can guarantee, because HTML and CSS is standardized, you can guarantee that you're going to see the exact same thing. And that's always been the challenge of cross-platform development, is how do you give the user a uniform experience across all these platforms? And the answer sometimes was, well, you don't. You use Mac's version of building desktop software, and then you build it again in Windows, and then maybe you support Linux, maybe you don't, who knows. But with the advent of all these new kind of places to run code, it made sense to use a platform that's already really cross-platform compatible, and that's the Chromium web browser, and that's why we have these desktop apps that are built using web technologies. Okay, one more question, then we're going to jump in. Pizza, what are your thoughts on WebAssembly? I think WebAssembly is the way forward. I think the quicker that becomes a thing, the better, because then nobody has to complain about JavaScript. They can get the same thing they get now with transpiling to JavaScript without actually using JavaScript. So that will be, that'll be fun. Okay, so we'll do another, keep asking your questions, no big deal. We're going to do another probably 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the video, but let's jump into some actual meat of this video. So we're going to be looking at 3 web servers primarily, and then we're going to discuss one just for completeness, and that's the IIS web server. That's the Microsoft primary one that comes on Microsoft servers. We're going to talk about that a little bit later if we have time. Obviously, I'm not a huge Microsoft evangelist. I'm more about open source and Linux technologies. Oh, one sec. Ubuntu 16, Ryan Duarte. Ubuntu 16, Apache 2. It wants sites in var HTML. I made a specific subfolder for each site and put them all under sites, but it's not working. It's probably a permissions issue. It's probably Apache can't see /sites. So I would try 2 things. I would try making sure the permissions for /sites match the same ones that are on /var/html and also /var/www/html. I think that should probably solve that. Thank you for the 5. I appreciate that. So we're going to talk about IIS a little bit later on, but primarily we're interested in Apache, Nginx, and we're going to talk about Lighttpd only because it does have, there's a reason I'm mentioning it. It's not because it's popular, it's because it represented kind of a good option instead of Apache, but before Nginx was big, but it just never took off. So the first one we're going to start with is Apache. Apache is a really, really old, stable product, and it's used everywhere, has huge amounts of compatibility. I want to say Apache came out in the mid-90s, perhaps 95, maybe 96. And I want to say it hit 1.0 shortly thereafter, probably before the year 2000. And Apache was the primary thing used in basically every PHP site on the planet at the time. And obviously PHP is still very popular today. There's still tons of sites deployed with PHP. And therefore, if you ever do any kind of web work, you're almost guaranteed to run into something running Apache. So kind of the highlights about Apache, it is free and open source, and it's completely free and open source. There is no additional offering for Apache. You get the free and open source version, and that's sort of the end of it. It's still the most popular today, but it is losing ground to Nginx. Kind of, if you look at the chart, it's sort of like doing this. It's like getting ready to cross, because I want to keep my bias out of the stream. I'm personally an Nginx guy, but I used Apache probably from 1996 all the way up until 2013, 2014. Roughly 2 to 3 years after Nginx hit 1.0. So, but I have a lot of experience with both. It is losing ground to Nginx, but it's not. It's still the most popular today. It has XML style syntax. I never really liked that. I always found Apache syntax to be kind of verbose. Apache syntax kind of looks like this. Its directives are, words with a capital letter and then some value. And then when you do blocks of different things, it's done in kind of an XML-y kind of way, or an HTML kind of way, where it has things you can put inside the tag to be kind of a variable for that directive. And I don't know, it always seemed kind of heavy to me. It seemed kind of arcane to me, and I never really liked that. I can probably understand why they did it. They did it back in this probably looked like a logical syntax back in the mid 90s, back when kind of web was really getting going. HTML was popular, XML was extremely popular, JSON really wasn't a thing yet, and then this is kind of what we got. And then because Apache is so old and so stable, obviously they're not going to make some massive change. They're going to release updated versions of Apache, and they're going to ensure that those maintain backwards compatibility for all the previous things. They don't want to put out like a 2.6 or a 3.0 and then just brick all the old configuration files. So, you don't expect the syntax to change away from this anytime into the future. But that's kind of the syntax there. As we look at some of these other syntaxes for these other web servers, you'll see that some of them are a little easier on the eyes, a little easier to understand. So it's worth mentioning PHP along with Apache for one primary reason. I've long said that if you get involved in PHP, one of the first things you'll notice is the barrier to entry for PHP is extremely simple. You likely just install PHP, which will install Apache along with it, and then you put your PHP files in the folder, and then you run them, and that's the end of that. It's extremely easy. And because of that, Apache and PHP are somewhat tied together. It's one of the few things where you can download, usually through the command line, a Apache module which can actually read PHP. And because of this, that's what makes it so easy. So the vast majority of PHP sites use Apache due to mod PHP. But that's not the only, it's not like PHP has to be ran on Apache. It's that they've made it really easy to do so through mod PHP. If you're not running PHP on Apache, you need something else, something that is an actual app server for PHP, and then you can just reverse proxy, stuff through your HTTP server to your app server. This is the same model that Python and Ruby and Node.js all use. But PHP is unique because PHP itself doesn't have an app server. It's serviced entirely by Apache directly through a module. So it's kind of interesting. And then with respect to the moduling system, it does support dynamically loaded modules, which is really great. That means that you can extend the core functionality of Apache and dynamically load them into the system without having to recompile Apache with your module. So that's of course beneficial, because having to rebuild a binary just to add additional functionality for Apache is sort of ridiculous. As far as the modes, this is where, oftentimes when people say, oh, Apache is slow and outdated or whatever, usually they're talking about the pre-fork mode. The problem with the pre-fork mode is when a request comes in for Apache, what it does is it starts up a whole new process just for that one request. And oftentimes this is very cumbersome on the CPU and very cumbersome on the RAM, particularly the RAM, because when you start up a process, you have to allocate a little bit of RAM. And the problem with that is how do you have thousands of requests open at one given time, especially ones that live a long time, if the hello drop table you, that's good, I like it. Thanks Trace, appreciate that. Also an Engineer Man team member, thank you for the 40, and thank you for the SQL inject, I like it, that's good. Yeah, so pre-fork model, one process per request, just not ideal. So later they came up with a different mode. They called it the worker model, and that's one child process per worker, not worker, and then one child thread per request. And what's cool about this is when you allocate, or when you start up a new thread, you don't have to start up like a whole new process that contains all this memory. It's just a new thread, and threads are relatively lightweight if compared next to processes. So adding this mode was hugely beneficial to make an Apache a lot more performant. And then the event mode was just a further improvement upon worker, where it became more efficient at long-lived connections. These are you're gonna, because in 2019 or even 2018, 2017, we have a lot of applications that we use on a day-to-day basis that implement a lot of real-time facilities. And that's anything like if you ever have used Uber, you're getting real-time stuff. You're calling things in real time, you're getting updates pushed to you in real time, and the Apache pre-fork model would be very bad at servicing all that. But the event model, on the other hand, the event model for HTTP servers is what allows these pieces of software to hold open, say, 50 or 100,000 connections without crashing, whereas the pre-fork model would die after about 500. So you can kind of, I put these in order of when they started becoming prevalent. And today the default is event, unless your system doesn't support it, in which case the default is worker, unless you have something you're using that is not compatible with worker, in which case it falls back to pre-fork, which is supported on everything. And as far as, I want to make a quick comparison. I want to jump down here. I put arguments, arguments, Apache versus Nginx. A lot of times I've been in organizations before where people insisted on arguing between Apache and Nginx, and the Nginx crowd would say, well, Nginx is so much faster, it's so much better than Apache. Look at all these benchmarks. Look at all these benchmarks. But what they failed to do is they failed to compare apples to apples. Oftentimes what they would do is they would compare the Nginx, the only mode it operates in, which is the evented IO mode, and they would compare that against like Apache pre-fork on some PHP application. And that's like comparing apples to watermelons. It's not correct. If you put Apache up against Nginx doing the exact same thing, like serving static files in the event or worker mode, you're going to find that their performance is pretty close to the same. Nginx does narrowly edge Apache out, but it's really not by much. We're not talking about Nginx is 5 times as fast. We're talking about it's maybe 15% faster. But the people making these arguments between the two, these false equivalencies, are making it out to be like Nginx is 3 times as fast, and that's just simply not the case. So if you ever see benchmarks like that, make sure you're looking at the full picture. So moving on to Nginx, Nginx is similar to Apache in a lot of ways. It is free and open source, but I did put an asterisk here, and that asterisk is because Nginx, and this is probably the one thing that I really hate about Nginx, is it has a paid commercial version with additional features. And what that implies is that their free and open source offering is going to be a crippled version of software that they already have. And I get it. They want to make money on it. It's fine. I don't agree with that. If you want to make money, just release it as a commercial product. Don't poison pill or Trojan horse your free product in there only to upsell people on a paid one. I don't think that's cool. But the only thing that makes it okay is that the paid commercial version has a bunch of stuff that I don't really care about anyways. And but know that there are two versions. And I think it's called Nginx Plus. I think Nginx Plus is their commercial offering, and I want to say it has some upgraded load balancing capabilities, and I think like a REST API to access stats, and then I think it has some additional monitoring and the ability to tie Nginx in with some other software to monitor kind of its performance telemetry. But now it may seem like that load balancing part's kind of a big deal, but if you're doing any serious kind of load balancing, you're not using Nginx anyways, so that's why I don't see it as that big a deal. If you're using a load balancing through Nginx, it's probably some just rudimentary stuff, and it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be super performant like, say, like an HA proxy. So that's why it's not that huge of a deal. They don't cripple it to the point where it's not usable, and if you're just a normal user of Nginx and you're not operating at scale, then it has everything you need. You know, you're never going to think to yourself, oh man, I should probably upgrade to get features XYZ, because it's probably not worth it. So Nginx is the second most popular. It is gaining ground on Apache and fast. I do believe that it is in the future going to be the most popular web server out there, but it's going to take a couple things for that to happen. First, it's going to need to have higher compatibility. Right now, I don't know if it's changed, but Nginx performance on Windows, not as good as Apache. So anybody that's running Windows Server and needs a high performance web server, they might pass over Nginx in favor of, say, Apache, or they might just use IIS. So that's a problem Nginx has to get over if they're ever going to kind of take over the world, you know, from a web server standpoint. It does have simpler syntax. I always called it JSON-like, but that could just be, you know, because it's like, this is really simple syntax. It's all lowercase. It uses braces instead of XML. You can nest things very easily. Things are terminated with a semicolon, so you know where it ends. And then the syntax is just, you know, you don't need quotes. Although I don't think you need quotes on Apache either, unless it's multiple words. This just seems cleaner to me than that. Things are shorter, things are lowercase. You know, they use underscores instead of capital letters, and they use blocks, and it just seems kind of nice. I really enjoy configuring Nginx servers. And again, keep in mind, I was a hard and fast Apache guy pretty much my entire career up until 2014. And I don't remember what changed. I got fed up over something that I couldn't do in Apache, but I did in like a minute in Nginx, and I was kind of sold on it from that point forward. But the configuration just seems better to me. Now, Nginx does have reasonable support for load balancing. This is that second asterisk I have here, and we already talked about that. That's the whole, like, the free and open source version is crippled, but the paid version isn't. But that doesn't mean that there is no load balancing support. It just means that it's not the full support that you get from the commercial version. Oh, I put Apache, but I meant Nginx. The Nginx is also extensible through Nginx modules, which are also dynamically loaded. However, they weren't always dynamically loaded. That's kind of a recent thing, and that was always kind of a problem with Nginx. If people wanted to extend the core functionality of Nginx, they were forced to bake that extension directly into the Nginx binary at compile time. And the problem with this is that a lot of people that run cloud servers and they get things running quick, they're often using, say, like Docker containers, which are already pre-built, or they're loading their stuff in through apt or through yum or whatever package manager you're using in the cloud. And that package manager is simply not going to have the version of Nginx that you need compiled with all the stuff that you need. So that basically required you to go compile it from source, and a lot of people just don't want to do that because now they don't get updates, and it's just kind of a pain. So by introducing the dynamic loading of Nginx modules really helped Nginx's growth in that kind of space. That was always kind of a hindrance, but you know, it's fine now. Nginx has one mode of operation, and it's most similar to the Apache event mode. What Nginx does is it starts a configurable number of worker processes. And in more recent versions, you can actually just specify auto, which means it'll start up enough processes to service all the load. So if the load starts increasing, it'll just add a new worker process and then go from there. Now, each worker process can then spin up lots and lots of new threads. So Nginx can support, I've tried it with a couple 100,000 connections, and it was perfectly fine. It worked all the same. Because of its evented I/O and its evented architecture, it has a very low memory footprint. So you can service lots and lots of requests and hold open lots and lots of connections with a very low memory, and it's still very efficient. And that's its only mode. Nginx, to my knowledge, doesn't have a kind of pre-fork mode. Not that you'd need it anyways. As far as Lighttpd, the reason I'm mentioning this is because prior to Apache getting big, this was kind of an option that you could have gone for. And for a brief period of time, I used this web server back in probably, I want to say, the late 2000s. You know, of course, Nginx isn't even, well, Nginx is out, but it's not 1.0 yet. You know, nobody's really using it. Nginx kind of this new cool kid on the block that nobody's using. And Apache is really the only thing that you are using, unless you're using Microsoft and using IIS. And I wanted to try something new. I was like, you know what? I don't have a really complex web server need. I'm just doing static files and then maybe some PHP. So, you know, let's try out something new. And then I tried it out for a little bit. It was fine, but at the time it wasn't mature enough and I had some stability issues, and that just kind of killed it for me. But I did use it a lot in the past, and I think that's why it's not more popular today. It's because when it first came out, it wasn't a really good polished product. But this software is in the wild, being used by some organizations on some of them operating at scale. So you know, it's definitely, it's a fine product today. It's just, it kind of lost the web server wars. You know, Apache and Nginx are simply too big, and then IIS is just simply too highly integrated in with Microsoft that you can't do much about that. But if you want an alternative to all these three, you know, simply, you know, definitely check it out. It's definitely worth looking at. Show Chase. I can't. If he comes over here, I will. I just can't. He's too far away. He's too far away. So as far as the syntax goes, here's kind of the syntax for Lighttpd. This is not ideal, in my opinion. This is kind of odd, but this is what the syntax looks like. It kind of reminds me of Perl, actually, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe because back in the mid-2000s or so, not mid-2000s, but late 90s, early 2000s, Perl was huge. Still, Perl CGI. That was kind of a popular way of making sites. And this might have been that's probably exactly what this is. This is probably written by somebody who used Perl. This reminds me a lot of Perl. But this is the syntax for Lighttpd. I don't know that I would ever, you know, I don't know that I would ever pick it up for anything. Excuse me. I don't know if I'd pick it up for anything major, but you know, if you want to check it out just to learn new technology, it's certainly worth looking at. Excuse me, kind of losing my voice here. So the last one we're going to talk about is IIS, and again, we're just doing this for completeness. It's not, even if you're using Microsoft, unless you're in the enterprise and you're required to use stuff that's only Microsoft and baked in with, you know, enterprise versions of Windows or baked in with Windows Server, then my advice would be, or unless you're writing actual Microsoft product, you know, if you're writing .NET, C#, or you're deploying classic ASP applications, which I know they're out there. I ran into one recently, so they're still out there. Unless you're running any of that, you're probably not going to be doing a whole lot with IIS, nor would you want to select it anyways. But I was surprised when I looked up at the web server market share stats that IIS is technically the most popular. And I put most popular in quotes because it's not the most popular in the majority, which is to say that greater than 50% of people aren't using IIS. It's more that all the other ones combined are more than IIS, but none of them alone are more than IIS. And I believe that's due to just the fact that there's a lot of Windows servers out there, and a lot of corporations use Microsoft and Windows servers, and they're lumping these kind of web server stats in with it. I don't think it's as popular as the charts say, but it's not like it's a dead web server either. The one benefit you're going to get with IIS, though, is that it is backed by Microsoft. And another one of my senior team members, Russian hacker, mentioned to me last night. He said, you know, when something goes wrong with Apache or Nginx, you know, who do you get to yell at? You know, who are you able to contact and say, hey, this is broken, fix it? And with Apache, the answer is nobody. With Nginx, the answer is nobody. With any free and open source project, the answer is generally nobody, because free and open source projects are not supported at a commercial level. Now, this is not true of IIS and Microsoft-backed software. If IIS does do something wrong, you could pick up the phone and call somebody who's going to help you out with IIS. And, oh, Chase is here. Hey, wanna be on stream? Hey. Okay. There you go. Hey, Chase. There's a Chase sighting right there. Always scared. Chase. Okay. There you go. Serviced. Request serviced. All right. So you got to see Chase. Everybody's happy now. Okay. Sorry, I broke my train of thought there. Yeah. So I mean, that is a benefit, especially if you're in the enterprise. Especially if you are in a business that's just deep in with Microsoft. It is nice to be able to call somebody and say, hey, your software is broken, fix it, you know, help us out. The other thing about IIS is it is going to be tightly integrated with Microsoft workflows, which is to say that if your organization is all using Windows, then you're most likely going to have a lot of GUIs. Your IIS is going to be managed through a GUI called IIS Manager, which does not involve a CLI. And some people may like that, some people may don't. I mean, Microsoft people, they are used to using GUIs because that's just kind of the Microsoft way. Microsoft doesn't put a whole lot of emphasis on CLI tools, and that's just because everything has a program. You know, SQL Server has a program to manage SQL Server. And IIS has a program called IIS Manager to manage it. And then everything in Windows, generally speaking, is all, you know, it's all configured through GUIs. You can do it. That's not to say that you can't do things through the command line. It's just to say that that's not really the Microsoft way. The Microsoft way is to do it through a program, usually provided by Microsoft. And that's because these things are tightly integrated together. So, as I said, it is common for .NET and classic ASP sites. It can be used for static sites, and it can also be used for non-Microsoft stuff too. It's not like IIS is just for Windows stuff. However, I don't know of a way, and maybe this is not true anymore because of projects like Mono and whatnot, but it used to be that if you were running like a C# site, your only option was to run it on a Windows server. And that was kind of that. I think that's starting to change, especially as Microsoft continues to have its lunch ate by Linux. The more that continues to happen, the more you'll start seeing open source tools that let Microsoft software run more on a Linux, you know, architecture or other systems. Okay, we're kind of at the end. I want to circle through some more questions. If you have any questions about anything I talked about, now is your time to put it in the chat. I'm going to what? Oh. I'm going to answer them all in the chat here. So we go to the top. I'm going to focus on web server questions first, and then I'll move on to any questions for the next about 11 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so one question was, when you say faster, how many milliseconds difference are we talking about when a person visits the website? Referring to Apache is faster on Windows. So probably one person visiting the site it's probably going to be the same speed if we're talking about just like a one-in-one. Usually when we're talking about performance benchmarks, we're talking about operating at load, and we're talking about how much can one CPU core handle worth of traffic on any given piece of software. And of course, inefficient software works less well than efficient software. So if probably a single person won't know whether they're having the request service by Apache on, I'm sorry, Nginx on Windows versus Nginx on Linux. But I would say, from what I've read, it's probably 85% of the speed. And that's a significant difference when these are things that are intended to operate at load. But I haven't personally checked any of the benchmarks. This is just what I read when I was kind of looking up certain things in here. Are C# backends common these days? Yes, absolutely. I mean, C# a massive language, the .NET framework. And again, I don't like Windows. I don't like Microsoft at all. But, I mean, C# an okay language. And the .NET framework, you know, the fact that all of it is tightly integrated is both a great and terrible feature. You know, it's great because you do get tight integration with all these services, and you're not having to like cobble things together like you sometimes have to do in the open source world. And also you get regular updates, and you get it backed by a big organization that you can, you know, wring the neck of if something goes wrong. So yeah, they're absolutely, in fact, Stack Exchange, the entire Stack Exchange network, that's a very large C# application. They run entirely on Microsoft servers. I think they last said they're running on like 28 huge HTTP servers and like 40 database servers, and then a couple like tagging servers, something like that. But that's one example of a widely used Windows application deployed in prod. Janet Real, what's the model of my new mic? It is the Audio Technica 2035, I think. It's like 80 bucks, something like that. I got it as a kit with the microphone as well as a Focusrite Scarlett Solo kind of thing where I can control the volume and do a couple of cool things with it. And also, I think it acts as the amplifier. And I picked it up as a package thing, and I'm really happy with it right now. Let's see, how many requests can a single worker process handle? It can handle as many as the CPU can handle. So Nginx runs single-threaded, but it's able to spawn additional processes to handle additional load. So while, you know, okay, so I should clarify. The worker process is single-threaded. The whole thing's not single-threaded, of course, because that would imply that the first request have to finish before you can service the second request. But once the CPU maxes out on one core, what Nginx is able to do, if you have an additional core available, is to start a second worker process. And if you use the auto keyword with Nginx, it will do this for you. You don't have to worry about it. It'll just scale it up as you go. I actually did a benchmark. Maybe I'll post it along with this video. I did a benchmark with Node.js and Nginx where I maxed out my 32 core server by just, and I tried to find where the equilibrium was. You know, like how many worker processes do I need versus how many node processes to max it out. And I think I was able to get like 172,000 requests a second or something crazy. And it was using 6 Nginx worker processes, 100% CPU, and that was using 26 node processes, 100% maxed out. I think that was the equilibrium. But keep in mind, that was high request volume, and the computation was in the high request volume and not necessarily in the application itself processing it. Of course, if the application processing the code was doing something that just takes 100 milliseconds or so, then all of the load would be on, say, Node.js versus on Nginx. Let's see. Yeah, Nginx and Apache, they're both written in C. They you can write modules that can interpret code. I don't know if there's any others besides mod PHP for Apache. Generally speaking, a web server, like a primary model for a web server, and this is how I use it. Like if you looked up emkc.org, the way that works is a request comes in to emkc.org, Nginx looks at it and it says, okay, how do I handle this? And it says, is this an image? Is this a file? Is this CSS, JavaScript, or some other random stuff? If it is, Nginx just serves it directly. It doesn't even touch the MKC application. It just looks in the folder, takes the file, sends it to the client, that's it. If it's a request that Nginx cannot handle, it forwards it to a different port on the system, which is then picked up by EMKC. EMKC then services it the rest of the way, sends it back to the user. And that's kind of how it goes. The only one that's unique is, again, I keep bringing up PHP. That's just because PHP doesn't have an app server, but most other languages out there, most other technologies, they do have their own app server. And this has been true for probably a decade at least now, maybe even 2 decades. See, back in the day, web servers would look at the shebang in your file and it would just execute that file in the interpreter. People that were programming back in the 90s, the early 2000s, probably remember this thing called the CGI bin. And the purpose of the CGI bin is files you would put in the CGI bin would be executed by the web server directly. It would actually look at the shebang in the file and it would execute it according to whatever the interpreter was. So this was popular with Perl. They said Perl CGI. And every Perl file back in the day had to have the proper shebang in the file to make sure that when it came time for the web server to execute it, it knew which interpreter to actually execute. And that was the old method of doing things. Of course, that was kind of an insecure method and it wasn't a scalable method because it didn't make use of all the technology we have today, like caching and whatnot. So nowadays they've kind of removed the responsibility of interpreting and executing software away from the web server, and they create these separate things called app servers. And this is true of all languages now. They say PHP is faster than Python or Ruby in the web domain. Would you agree? I really don't know. They're all interpreted languages. If you were to ask me that question back in 2013 or so, I probably would have said no. But in 2019, I just don't know the answer because PHP 7 is out. It's supposed to be, excuse me, it's supposed to be a lot faster. It's supposed to be a totally rewritten API that has a completely new optimizer that makes it supposedly a lot faster than it used to be. And in the process, they did break some backwards compatibility to achieve this kind of new performance, but I just don't know the answer to that today in 2019. I'd say they're probably on par with each other in the web sphere. You got to keep in mind that even though people don't, like PHP a lot, PHP is still low barrier to entry, and it's still going to be built for the web at the beginning. Phil Jones, thank you for the 5. You answered some cloud computing questions that I had a few weeks ago. Thanks. No problem at all. Please let me know if you have any more questions. Happy to answer those. Avi12, is it feasible to develop a web server in JavaScript that is on par with Nginx and Apache? And the answer is a definitive no. And that's just because when you're writing things like web servers and things that interact with low-level technologies on the system, you have to use a language like C or C++. There's just no kind of room to write it in a dynamic language or one that's interpreted. It has to be one that you can compile into a final binary that kind of runs right on bare metal. So definitely no. That's why a lot of system software is always primarily C and C++ based, and it's just because you get better performance with those languages and they're more suited for operating at bare metal than these not to go on a tangent, but languages are all about, it's either really easy to write and it's not so fast, or it's really, really hard to write, but it's very fast. And you kind of pick one or the other. You either get development speed or you get performance. It's kind of tough. And anybody who makes a language that is both extremely fast and easy to write will be the new rock star in computing. But right now, such a language doesn't exist. Some YouTubers are saying on live streams that they think PHP is a dead language. It is most assuredly not a dead language. PHP is all over the place. It's going to continue to exist for the foreseeable future because it's very easy to get moving. It is actively supported. It does get better. I don't use PHP anymore. I stopped using PHP in 2014. I do Node.js exclusively now, but even back then it had its quirks, but it worked. I built major complex software with it that worked fine. My only problem with PHP, and they need to sort this out sooner rather than later, is that PHP does not support threading. You can't, it's ridiculous. You can't do multi-threading with PHP. There is a way to shoehorn a pthreads implementation delivered as a PHP extension, but that just seems hacky to me, and that's kind of ridiculous. Something as core as opening up new threads for an application should be built right into the language. So until they do that, it's kind of hard to take it seriously. It's probably the only language on the planet that does not have a concurrency model that involves threads. But such is life. All right, let me look. We're about 1 minute over. Let me make sure I got all these questions. I'm going to just where to purchase a web host from. I like DigitalOcean, and I get my domains from Google Domains, but they're all essentially the same. Thanks, Aaron. Take care and enjoy. Thanks for coming to the live stream. How about Rust? Ooh, Rust. Rust is coming. If you look on the stream schedule, I'm actually going to be talking about strategies for learning a new language. And guess which language I'm learning? Rust. So it'll be good. $2 for some surge protector plugs. Yeah, you know what's funny is I do surge protect everything in my house. It's just the electricity is getting in here. It's getting in here somehow. I don't know if it's through the wire, through coax or something, but thank you. I'll apply that $2 ASAP to some plugs. Okay, I think we've covered everything. Let me just make sure. Let's see, develop web server, PHP, see how many requests. We're good. I think we pretty much covered all the web server questions. Oh, is there, okay. Okay, I think we're gonna call it. We'll do a just do a little outro. So we do operate a Discord server. I know there's been some links that's been posted in the chat. If you want to go further here, if you want to chat with me or chat with the team or chat with 6,000 other like-minded people, you should certainly join the Engineer Man Discord server. Somebody will post a link in the chat here in a second. And there's a lot of people on there. It's very well curated. It's got a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different skill sets. Software engineers, electrical engineers, any type of engineering. We got peer programmers, we got self-taught people, we got college people, we got people from all over the globe with all different credentials, working for all different kinds of companies, and there's just a lot to learn over there. There's a lot of good conversation that goes on there. So, and then we are going to be doing, the next live stream will be exactly 2 weeks from today, same time. It'll be noon, 2 Saturdays from now. And I think we're going to be doing, next stream is going to be the state of mobile development in 2019. And you're really going to want to watch that because if you're not a mobile developer, you kind of want to have an idea on what kind of mobile technologies are involved in making applications that you use every day. And then maybe it will, and you'll probably be surprised to learn that there are web technologies that can be used to make mobile applications. So we'll be sure to talk about that. The format will be similar to this one. And other than that, I think we're pretty much done. If you have any questions about anything you saw in this video, just come reach me on my Discord. I respond to messages. If you want to say hi, happy to say hi back and all that. So I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their weekend. I appreciate everybody showing up to the live stream. Really good turnout today, having not done a live stream in about a month. Really sorry about that. It was kind of out of my control. I tried to get everything back going as quick as I could, and I think this was a really good stream. So have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and I hope to see you on the server or on the next video, and hopefully on future live streams. So take care.